Hello everyone, George here again, and unfortunately, as with the last video, even though I completely changed all of my settings, my capture software failed once again, so I had to speed things up and I'm re-narrating them over top. So let's take a look at what I'm actually working on. So we're back in the room and my expectations are to jump into creating all the different walls. So right now I'm looking at the reference material, getting an idea that for one, the walls only really contain two interesting features. One is the fact that they're kind of white with this splotchy, moldy design. And then two is they have this checkerboard with red border on the top and the bottom. So now inside of Maya, I'm going to go around, quick take a look at the different walls, make sure that I have the geometry set up properly to make it easy for me to texture these different assets. The idea here is that rather than spend a bunch of time trying to paint, these long rectangle bands, I just create geometry that will then easily be selectable, and I'll make it work over in Substance Painter. Now, of course, before I can export anything, I need to go into my outliner, check things and make sure the names are proper, and then I also need to check out the UVs. Now there are a few problems with the UVs. I'm just going through and checking each wall. They're not exactly perfect, and what I'm going to do now is grab a few of them and use the planar UV tool on each one of them, make sure that they're pretty much set up right. The side ones are going to end up giving me a little bit of trouble, and that's because of the gaps in the window and the door. And we'll address that shortly. Now here I try to play around with the overall design and get a sense of if there's some way for me to make this somewhat wasted space in the door, in the top, in the window, and maybe cut it up into separate areas. But at the same time, when I cut it up, I want to make sure that doesn't make more work for me inside of Substance Painter. Since I plan on using, those checkerboards or tiles or whatnot for those different areas, I kind of want them to line up together. So as I start cutting things up, I, ultimately make a few mistakes. I'm going to end up undoing pretty much everything you see here. But what's important is that I'm trying it out, trying to see if it maximizes my UV space, so I'm working with more texels than before. And it's somewhat better than it was before, but ultimately it does cause problems with me trying to unwrap everything. So here I am trying to align the different bits, so that's going to be part of where the checkerboard should be on the wall, and I'm just moving them up, moving the different UVs around, trying to make things work. Ultimately, none of this really works very well, and I'm going to pretty much go back and put a planar surface on this entire thing and start back over, and really only cut out one portion of it, which is for the doorway, and let the rest of it just sort of be where it's supposed to be. So once again, we're back to things being the way they are. I cut out the door area, and we're going to go ahead and lay everything out and let the computer pretty much figure out the best way for it to spread things out. And as you see there, we're definitely using up more of the UV space, which means more detail for us to work with. I do the same thing for the opposite side, now that I'm pretty much sure that that's the best way to, continue. And I'm pretty much ready to go. I don't have anything else to do inside of here. Just going to double check those UVs again for the other areas. And then we're going to go ahead and export everything out. Before that, of course, I need to make sure that every object has its own material. I screwed this up a little bit at first. I didn't realize I had already gone through in a prior video and set up all the different materials. So then I just go ahead, click around, make sure the materials are all set up. Then I'll grab all these different elements and export them out as an FBX for my Substance Painter program. All right, so now we're in Substance Painter. We're going to go ahead and bake all of our different maps that we need in order to make the materials work properly. So, things like curvature and normal and all the other good things. Now we're going to take a look at the different materials to see what works out properly. Now, I really like this kind of tile. It's not, a checkerboard, but I think it looks really nice. So I'm going to bring that in and work with that in those center regions. I'm going to go ahead and mask it off and only select that center border area. Then we are going to go into it and change the UV scaling on that object, bring it down a bit, and then I'm going to play for a while just trying to get that whole thing to match up properly. So I'm going to move them up and down and finesse it very, very a lot, basically, up and down, trying to get it right and never quite succeeding. And that pretty much sums up the next 5 to 10 minutes of my life. Now that I kind of like the way it looks, we're going to have to go in here and address 2 more portions of this. First, I'm going to go through and check out the height on this object. Even though I might not use a height map, I still want to go in there and just make sure all my settings are appropriate. Now I need to deal with the tops and the bottoms. I'm not going to quite use the same thing in the image itself. Oh, I'm sorry. No. First thing I need to deal with is the fact that that was red and black. And in my case, I need it to be white and black instead. So I'm going to go and play with the luminance and the, saturation values, and as well as the contrast values until I get something that approaches that. And this is really as close as I get to it. Now I need to find a tile that's going to work for the tops and the bottoms, and I really like this blue tile that's sort of broken up, so I bring that in. I'm going to mask that off as usual, and I'm going to grab the tops and the bottoms of each area, and we're going to then go ahead and change the color on this into a nice deep red. That kind of matches what we have in FNAF. And now I'm going to play around with the different values you see on the side. So I'm going to see about making things thinner or thicker, and I am going to go ahead and change the UVY value. That is where it is, so that line down the center goes away. And that's pretty much it for getting the red portion of this to work properly. Now I spent some time trying to tweak the, diamond layer. Nothing I like really comes through, so I end up just kind of screwing it up for a while and then end up going back to the settings I had originally. Alright, so now we need to deal with the walls, and that's pretty much going to be everything I deal with for the remainder of this video, and that's because I don't quite like everything that I do. First, I bring on this Spanish plaster type material. I like it mainly because it provides a lot of height variance, a lot of grain and grit on the surface, and I think that just looks really nice. I'm going to change the color, darken that a little bit. I'm also going to reduce the UV size a bit so that we have more of it. I'm going to add a height map, but I'm going to way decrease that height information because it's coming out way too much in that particular surface, and it just looks horrible. We also have the problem that the height information is coming through onto the tile surface, which we'll have to mask out and get rid of, which you can see right there. Now, the white surface by itself isn't what I need, so I'm going to try to throw a rust texture down first, darken it a lot, and play around with different smart masks and some of the different generators for masks to see if I can get something that looks good or approximates, sort of that moldy texture on the surface without doing a ton of work myself. And I don't really do well at all in this portion of the work. I'm going to try to use this moss from overhead thing, and you can see right there it looks absolutely horrible. The huge contrast between the Spanish plaster and the rust just looks miserable. So I'm pretty much going to just throw on different masks and see if any of them work. None of them really do. I'm going to end up going through the generator. None of that really works either. And that's mainly due to the fact that I'm using that rust. I'm going to add a lot of different filters as well. I try adding a blur filter vertically to make it seem like it's dripping. I try adding contrast. I try adding, what is it called? The opposite of blur. Can't remember for some reason off the top of my head. Sharpen. Sharpening the image. That doesn't work either. And it just looks very fake and just, well, horrible. So after a while of looking at this thing, I just tried duplicating the Spanish stucco. I'm going to go in here and darken it and put in a black mask, and then I try to use particle effects, which without tweaking heavily usually just don't work very well. That is, they work great the first time you open the program up and you're like, hey, I can make things look like they drip. But once you start really using it for a while, these effects just look canned, and they don't provide anything great looking unless you spend a lot of time with the settings on them, making sure they look proper. And I'm not doing that here. I'm just running through it using the basic default settings, and I don't like how it looks. So I'm going to do this a little bit more. I'm going to end up painting it across the top, trying to fix it, and none of that's going to work. And we'll move on to the next thing I try. Once again, last-ditch effort to see if that's going to work, and ultimately it doesn't. So now I'm thinking, all right, let's just once again take that stucco layer and, you know what? No, let's not do the stucco layer. Let's jump down and use something that I really didn't expect that I would use, and that is this sulfur material. The sulfur material itself has two different colors that you put in there. Those colors are not exactly what shows up. They have sort of a tint to them based upon the underlying bit, so that's why it doesn't look exactly right. So I'm going to play around a little bit until I see something on the viewer there that looks just about right. And then I'm going to play around with the different settings, check out whether or not any of them look a little bit better. As you can see here, nothing really jumps out at me as being bad. I've got some white splotches here and there, and I'm going to keep trying to work with that for a little bit. So here, after I darken it, things look a lot better. I'm really liking kind of how this looks. It's got this nice speckled design everywhere, similar to what we were dealing with before, at least in the reference material. I'm going to go through now and just continue to tweak the luminance and contrast and so forth, make it look kind of the way I want to. And yeah, I'm pretty happy. There's these little white bits here and there, and there's some issues, you know, in different spaces, but I'm pretty happy with how it looks. I am going to add a mask to it though, and we're going to add that moss from above smart mask to it. And that's going to make it so that it really only appears at the top and a tiny bit at the bottom, which is exactly kind of what I'm going for. And I'm going to use triplanar instead. Triplanar is going to set up those UVs a little bit nicer, especially where I have those cuts that I set up before. Now I do notice I've got a problem where the height and normal information are coming through, so I'm going to need to go into this object and make sure I mask out it from the other layers. Not only masking it out, but in the layers above it, I need to make sure that I replace the height and normal information. That way it doesn't come through from the underlying layers. And of course I'll tweak the height a little bit here and there in the normal value, just so it kind of pops out a little bit as if it's disturbing the surface. So as we can see here, it's not quite perfect yet. We still have some stuff coming through, so I'm going to continue to go through and mask things out and make sure that on my layers for the tiles that I'm replacing the underlying values so that it doesn't come through and cause, well, basically distortion on my height layer. Now I'm going to go through, add that rust back, darken it a lot again, and all I'm doing here is trying to add some variation to the surface beyond what we had before, and a little bit of color as well. And I'm going to try something a little bit different here. I'm going to put on one of these masks. Now this mask failed miserably. I don't want it to work that way. And I try this one that's very soft, a dust that's soft, and I turn it off and on. And what I'll notice here is that it only really seems to affect the corners of the object. And that works perfectly for what I need it to do. And I'm pretty much done there. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And hopefully by the next video that I put out, I will have figured out this whole capture problem where I can't seem to record and talk at the same time. See you next time. So long. Goodbye.